The shocking announcement. Daniel had faced many strange things since he first left Earth behind to wander the trade routes of the outer colonies. But nothing had prepared him for this moment. The day had started like any other, with the sons of Falara shining down over the sprawling alien city, and the air filled with the scent of flowers that grew on tall, vine-covered towers. He had been trying to make himself useful since the crash that stranded him here, working with the Falari to fix machines or helping their scouts map dangerous terrain. But even after months of living among them, he still felt like an outsider. Their sleek fur and feline eyes marked them as something other than human. And though they were humanoid in shape, their culture was as alien as their appearance. Liari was different. She had been the first Falari to show him kindness when he arrived. Broken and lost her sharp claws and piercing eyes had frightened him at first. Yet there was something about the way she carried herself with honor and pride that drew him closer. Over time they had trained together, sparred together, and shared stories of battles fought and victories won. He had begun to trust her, though he never imagined that trust would one day lead to something that would shake the entire colony. It happened in the marketplace one ordinary morning. The Falari merchants were calling out their wares from stalls filled with glowing crystals and strange meats. Daniel was examining a tool made for repairing engines when Liari appeared beside him with her usual graceful stride. She looked around at the crowd as if measuring them, then turned to him, her tail flicking with nervous energy. "Daniel," she said, her voice carrying a weight that silenced even the noisy traders. "You should prepare, human. We are having kittens." For a moment the words did not make sense to him. He thought perhaps it was some sort of Falari idiom, something lost in translation. But the way the market went silent told him. Otherwise every eye turned to them, ears twitching, whiskers trembling. Even the merchants, who rarely cared for gossip, were staring with open mouths. Daniel felt heat rise in his face, and he opened his mouth to protest, but Liari raised a hand as if daring him to deny it. The news spread like fire through dry grass. Within minutes, whispers turned to laughter, and laughter turned to arguments. Falari children giggled, pointing at him, while warriors narrowed their eyes in suspicion. The elders gathered in the central hall, muttering about omens and taboos. Some said it was impossible. Others said it was dangerous. Daniel could barely keep his head straight as he was pulled before the council to answer questions. He did not even understand. Sitting on a high platform, the eldest Falari female narrowed her golden eyes at him, her fur streaked with silver. "Is this true, human? Did our warrior bind herself to you?" Daniel stammered, unsure what to say. He glanced at Liari, who stood tall beside him. "Unflinching, it is true," she said calmly, and her voice carried across the hall. "He is mine and I am his. We share blood now, and soon we will share kittens." The reaction was explosive. Warriors growled in protest. Merchants shouted. Elders argued. Daniel wanted to shout that it was impossible, that humans and Falari could not have children together. But Liari placed a firm hand on his shoulder, her claws just barely grazing his skin, as if warning him to remain silent. And when he saw the conviction in her eyes, he bit back his doubts. That night the colony buzzed with rumors. Some believed Liari was joking. Others claimed she was cursed by the gods. A few whispered that perhaps the kittens would be monsters, born of two worlds. There were even some who suggested the Galactic Council would need to be informed. Daniel sat in the small dwelling the Falari had given him, staring at the stars outside the window. He felt a storm building around him. And for the first time since arriving here, he realized that whatever bond he shared with Liari, it had just placed him in the center of something far larger than himself. Liari entered quietly, her silhouette framed by the moonlight. She knelt beside him, and for once her confident expression softened. "I know you are confused, Daniel, but you must trust me. This is no joke. Our people do not speak of kittens unless it is true you are human. Yes, but there is more to your kind than the galaxy knows." Daniel rubbed his face with his hands, struggling to breathe under the weight of her words. "Why me?" he asked. "Why?" Liari tilted her head, and her eyes glowed like molten gold. "Because you are stronger than you think, and because fate has already chosen the path we walk." He wanted to argue, wanted to tell her this was madness. But as she reached out and held his hand, he felt a spark pass between them. Something alive, something undeniable. In that moment, fear clashed with wonder, and deep inside him a question began to form. If it was true, If somehow he and Liari could bring new life into this world, what would it mean for humanity, for the Falari, and for the galaxy that was already watching from afar? The answer would come soon, but not before the storm broke. Cultural clash. The next morning, Daniel woke to the sound of voices outside his dwelling. The Falari village had become restless since the announcement. Whispers had turned into heated debates, and what once was a calm community now felt like the center of a storm. He pushed the door open to see groups of Falari standing in tight circles, their tails flicking with agitation, and their eyes fixed on him. When they noticed his presence, some hissed under their breath. Others laughed cruelly, as if mocking him for daring to stand at the side of one of their warriors. Liari was waiting for him at the edge of the training grounds, her expression as composed as always. Yet Daniel noticed the slight twitch in her ears, a sign of unease. She motioned for him to follow and led him to the council chambers once again. This time the hall was more crowded with warriors, merchants, elders, and even curious children filling the space. The high platform where the elders sat glowed with faint crystal light as the eldest female spoke her tone, sharp and demanding. "Liari, you have broken tradition. Never has one of our kind chosen a mate outside our species, and now you claim to carry kittens born of human blood. Do you understand the gravity of your actions?" Liari did not flinch. She lifted her chin and replied clearly, "I understand, and I stand by my choice. Daniel has proven his courage, his will, and his loyalty. He is worthy of me, worthy of my people, and worthy of the future we will bring forth." Her words caused ripples of shock through the crowd. Some hissed in anger. Others muttered nervously. Daniel could only stand silently, his mind racing. He felt as though the fate of entire worlds was being placed on his shoulders, yet he had no control over it. One of the elder warriors stepped forward. His mane of fur bristling with disdain, he towered over Daniel and sneered at him with fangs bared. "This is madness. Humans are weak. They break easily, their bones snap, their hearts falter, their minds shatter in battle, and you dare to claim one such as this will father the future of the Falari." The warrior spat on the ground before turning to the crowd. "Do not let this dishonor stain us." The crowd roared in agreement, but Liari stepped forward, her hand resting lightly on the hilt of her blade. "Silence," she commanded, and though many still hissed, they obeyed. She looked directly at the warrior, her golden eyes blazing. "You speak of weakness, yet this human has endured trials. You could not imagine his body may not be as strong as yours, but his spirit burns brighter than any I have seen. He has fought beside me. He has bled for me, and he has not faltered." Daniel felt a surge of gratitude at her words, though he still questioned whether he could live up to such praise. The warrior snarled but stepped back, unwilling to challenge her further. Instead, another elder spoke, a female with sleek black fur and a voice like low thunder. "If what you say is true, then this is no longer a matter for our village. The Council of the Galaxy must hear of it. If a new bloodline is being born, one that blends human and Falari traits, then it may change the balance of power." The mention of the Galactic Council made the hall grow silent. Even the children stopped fidgeting. Daniel knew of the Council from stories. They were the rulers of hundreds of species across the stars, enforcing laws with an iron grip. Humanity had little say in its decisions, for Earth was still seen as young and fragile compared to ancient civilizations. If word reached them about him and Liari, he knew it would not end quietly. That evening, Daniel walked through the village, his thoughts heavy. Falari mothers pulled their children close when he passed, as if he carried disease. Young warriors laughed and made claws gestures at him, mimicking kittens and pointing at his chest. Only a few watched with curiosity rather than scorn. He felt the weight of 1,000 judging eyes pressing into him. But what hurt most was not the anger or the mockery. It was the uncertainty inside himself. Could it be true? Could he really father children with Liari? Or was this some cultural misunderstanding he struggled to grasp? Liari joined him as the suns dipped below the horizon. Her presence steadying him, she explained slowly and with patience. "The Falari do not speak of kittens as a joke when one declares such a bond. It means life has already begun to take root within us. I feel it, Daniel, I know it. And no council, no warrior, no elder will take this truth from me." Her certainty both comforted and frightened him. He wanted to believe her, wanted to trust that their bond was real and unbreakable, but deep inside a part of him still feared what this would mean not just for him and Liari, but for the galaxy that already dismissed humanity as weak. He thought of the mocking warriors, the disapproving elders, and the looming shadow of the council, and he realized that whatever lay ahead was bigger than anything he had ever faced. The next day, rumors became official. Word envoys from neighboring star systems had arrived, their ships gleaming like knives against the sky. Alien representatives stepped into the Falari council hall, their faces twisted with amusement as they regarded Daniel with cold alien eyes. They laughed openly at the idea that a human could be part of something so important, calling him a fragile mistake, an accident of biology. One even sneered that the council should cage him like a pet before things grew dangerous. Daniel clenched his fists, his pride stinging with every insult. But Liari placed herself between him and the envoys, her tail lashing with fury. She declared before them all, "You may laugh now, but soon you will see what this human means to us and to the galaxy." Daniel felt her words echo inside him, a promise and a warning. The storm was no longer only within the Falari village, it was spreading across the stars, and he knew his life had changed forever. Rising tension. The envoys wasted no time spreading their message beyond the village. Soon the entire region buzzed with talk of the impossible bond between a human and a Falari, and the claim that kittens were on. The way some species mocked openly, others expressed alarm, and some whispered that it could mean something dangerous to the balance of power. Daniel could feel the atmosphere shifting around him. Every glance from strangers now carried weight and suspicion, and even those Falari who once treated him with indifference began to look at him as though he were a symbol of something greater than himself. Liari refused to bend under the pressure. She continued to train with him every day, her blades flashing in the training grounds while her tail lashed with restrained fury. She told him again and again that the only way forward was to face this storm with strength, that if they showed fear, the enemies around them would crush them. Daniel tried to follow her example, though inside he felt as though he was carrying a burden heavier than any he had faced before. One evening, the council called for an audience. The entire village gathered in the great hall alongside the envoys who had arrived. From neighboring systems, the chamber was filled with tension. Voices whispered as eyes darted toward Daniel and Liari. The eldest elder rose, her fur glinting silver in the dim crystal light. She spoke with a voice that carried across the chamber. "The Council of Falara cannot keep this matter hidden. The Galactic Council has demanded we send word of the claim if it is true. If new life is growing from a human and a Falari, then it could mark the beginning of something the galaxy has never seen." At those words, laughter erupted from one of the alien envoys, a tall insectoid being whose mandibles clicked mockingly. He pointed one clawed finger at Daniel and hissed, "Humanity is frail. Its bones are brittle. Its minds, fragile. Do not insult us with the suggestion that they could create something powerful. He will father nothing but weakness." The hall shook with a mix of laughter and outrage. Falari warriors bristled, some shouting at the envoy to hold his tongue, but others lowered their eyes in doubt. Daniel felt the blood pound in his ears. Humiliation burned through him, and for a moment he wanted to run to escape the crushing ridicule. But Liari stepped forward, her hand resting firmly on his shoulder, and she spoke with fire in her voice. "I chose him because he is strong. Not in the ways you see with your narrow eyes, but in the ways that matter. His spirit will not break. His will cannot be crushed. And when the time comes, you will see that what we create together is no weakness, but strength greater than any of you imagine." Her words silenced many, but the envoys only sneered, muttering among themselves. Daniel swallowed hard, his chest heavy with conflicting emotions. He wanted to believe her, wanted to stand tall beside her, but doubt still gnawed at him. How could one human stand against the judgment of so many species? How could his blood mean anything to a galaxy that saw him as nothing more than a fragile creature from a young world? That night, the village grew restless. Arguments broke out in the streets. Warriors clashed with words and sometimes claws. The news had become more than gossip. It was now a matter of politics and power. Some feared the kittens would be a threat. Others believed they could be a gift, and still others only wanted to see Daniel cast out to restore what they thought was order. Daniel sat awake in his dwelling, staring into the fire. Liari at his side, the flames flickering against her golden eyes. She spoke softly, but firmly. The galaxy underestimates you because it has never seen what humans are capable of. They do not know your resilience. They do not know your fire. But I know, and soon they will know too. Her certainty made something stir within him, a spark of pride that he had almost forgotten since leaving Earth. He thought of the long nights back home where humans pushed through impossible odds. He thought of explorers who braved oceans, warriors who fought against overwhelming enemies, people who endured famine, storms, and loss and yet kept moving forward. If humanity had survived all of that, then maybe he too could endure this day's past, and more envoys arrived until the village felt more like a stage than a home. The Galactic Council sent a declaration, demanding that Liari and Daniel be brought before them to face judgment. Whispers spread that the council was already preparing to rule against them. Some spoke of extermination of any hybrid offspring. Others of exile. Daniel realized the storm was no longer coming, it had already arrived. One evening a group of young Falari approached him, their fur sleek and eyes sharp. They spoke not with mockery but with curiosity. They asked what made humans different, what made them worthy. Daniel found himself speaking of Earth, of the struggles his people faced, of the endless determination that burned in their hearts as he spoke. He noticed the young warriors listening intently, some nodding as though something in his words stirred them. It was the first time he felt not just mocked or judged but heard. Still, tension grew by the day. Warriors who opposed Liari muttered about driving Daniel out before the council could intervene. Rival clans whispered of seizing Liari and forcing her to abandon him. And always in the background the envoys watched with cold, calculating eyes, waiting for their chance to strike. Daniel began to realize that this was no longer about him alone. It was about humanity itself, and how the galaxy would view them from this moment on. He felt the weight settle into his chest, but for the first time he did not feel entirely alone. Liari stood beside him, fierce and unwavering, and now a few young warriors too seemed to see something in him. He did not know if it would be enough, but he knew that whatever came next he could not falter. The galaxy was watching, and their judgment would shape the future of not only him and Liari, but perhaps of all humankind. The test of loyalty. The summons came at dawn, the sky still painted in streaks of violet as the council guards knocked on Daniel's door. Their expressions were cold, their tails stiff with discipline, and when Daniel stepped outside, he saw the entire village gathered around the central square. Liari was already there, standing tall with her arms crossed over her chest, her golden eyes watching every movement. The eldest elder raised her voice, so all could hear. Last night the galactic envoys demanded proof that this human is worthy. They say no outsider can claim one of ours without trial. Today he will face the test of loyalty, and if he fails, both he and Liari will be cast out. The words struck Daniel like a hammer. Though he tried to keep his expression steady, the crowd roared, some with excitement, others with anger, and many with disbelief. Liari stepped toward him, her hand brushing his shoulder, her claws gentle against his skin. "You must not falter," she whispered. "They will test not your strength alone, but your resolve. If you give them even a flicker of weakness, they will tear you apart." Daniel nodded, though his throat was dry. He was led to the center of the square where a circle of warriors surrounded him, their eyes glowing in the rising sun. One stepped forward, holding two blades crossed in the traditional Falari salute. "You are human," he said in a voice filled with disdain. "Prove to us that you are more than fragile bones. Prove you can stand beside our warrior. Prove you are worthy to father her future." The trial began with the first warrior lunging at him. Daniel had trained with Liari for months, but never against a foe. This determined, he ducked and rolled the blade, whistling past his ear. The crowd hissed and gasped, some laughing already, but Daniel forced himself to rise, his heart pounding. He remembered Liari's words that spirit mattered more than flesh. He could not match their strength, but he could endure, and he could think. The fight dragged on. Warrior after warrior came at him, each strike faster, each test harsher. Daniel's arms ached, his breath burned in his chest, yet he refused to fall. He used every scrap of cunning, dodging at the last second, tricking one opponent into striking another, using his smaller frame to slip past attacks that would have torn him apart. The Falari jeered, but slowly their jeers turned into murmurs as they saw he did not break. At one point, a massive Falari warrior knocked him to the ground. Claws digging into the dirt beside his head. The crowd roared, expecting the end. But Daniel pushed back with every ounce of strength, grabbing a handful of dirt and throwing it into the warrior's eyes before rolling to his feet. The warrior snarled, wiping at his face, but the crowd grew louder now. Not mocking, but shouting with something closer to respect. Liari's eyes never left him. Her face unreadable, but Daniel could see the faintest flicker of pride in her gaze. He fought on until the final warrior stepped forward. This one was no common fighter, but the same elder warrior who had mocked him days before, his mane bristling. His fangs bared, he raised a long, curved blade and pointed it at Daniel. "This will end. Now," he growled, and he struck with a fury that shook the ground. Daniel's body screamed with exhaustion, but his mind burned with a fire he had not felt since leaving Earth. He blocked one strike, barely dodged another, then felt the blade slice across his arm. Hot. Pain blossomed, but he gritted his teeth and refused to cry out. The warrior pressed harder, forcing him back until Daniel stumbled near the edge of the circle. Gasps filled the air, but something inside him snapped. Not with fear, but with defiance. He roared with a voice that carried through the square and charged forward, slamming his shoulder into the warrior's chest. The larger Falari staggered, surprised, and Daniel seized the moment. Knocking the blade aside and standing tall before him, the square went silent. Daniel was bleeding, his body shaking, yet he remained standing unbroken. The elder warrior glared, but finally stepped back, lowering his blade with a grudging nod. The eldest elder rose from her seat, her golden eyes fixed on Daniel. "You have endured more than expected, human. You have proven that you do not break easily. Perhaps there is more to you than fragile bones." The crowd erupted this time, not in laughter but in wild debate. Some shouted in anger, others in approval, but no one could deny that Daniel had faced the test and survived. Liari stepped forward, standing beside him, her hand resting firmly on his arm. She looked to the council and declared, "You see what I have seen. This is no weakling. This is a man worthy of me, worthy of the future we will shape." Daniel stood there trembling but alive, his chest heaving, his arm bleeding. Yet a strange calm filled him. For the first time he felt he had taken a step toward earning their respect. Though many still doubted, and many still hated, he had shown that humans were not as fragile as they believed. He had shown that he could endure, and that endurance was the weapon of his people. The council did not declare full acceptance, but they allowed Daniel and Liari to remain together. The matter, they said, would be judged further when the Galactic Council arrived. Until then, he had proven himself worthy enough to stand beside her for now. Daniel left the square, his head spinning, his body aching, but when he looked at Liari, he saw pride and warmth in her eyes, and it gave him strength. Yet deep inside he knew this was only the beginning. Whispers still lingered of betrayal, of plots from the envoys who wanted to end this union before it began. And though he had survived today, darker trials were already gathering in the shadows. Betrayal and capture. The village did not rest after the trial. Instead, the air grew thicker with tension. Daniel could feel it in every step he took. Whispers followed him through the street, some now spoken with a reluctant respect, but many laced with fear and hostility. Liari remained close to him, her presence a shield against the scorn of her people. But even she knew that the test had not ended anything. It had only bought them time. Rumors spread quickly that the Galactic Council had already dispatched envoys with orders not only to investigate, but to decide their fate. Some Falari feared the Council's wrath. Others hoped the decision would remove the burden from their tribe. But beneath the noise, another thread of whispers slithered through the streets, one of betrayal. Daniel did not see it coming one night. While the moons hung low over the horizon, he and Liari were returning from training when shadows fell across their path. Armored figures stepped from the alleys surrounding them, their eyes gleaming in the darkness. Daniel instinctively moved to draw the crude blade he carried, but Liari hissed, "Stay close." Her ears pinned back, her claws extended. They fought fiercely side by side, cutting down two attackers in a flash of steel and fur. But there were too many. Daniel felt heavy blows strike his body, claws tearing at his clothes. His arms pinned before he could recover one of the attackers, struck him hard across the skull. Stars burst in his vision and darkness swallowed him. When he awoke, the air was cold and smelled of metal. He was in a cell walls carved of stone, reinforced with alien alloy chains bound his wrists heavy and unyielding. The dim glow of crystals lit the chamber, and beyond the bars he could see guards standing watch. Not Falari, but alien envoys. Their shapes cruel and strange, insectoid forms, chittering soft words, mechanical beings with glowing eyes, scanning his. Every move Daniel's stomach tightened as he realized where he was. He had been taken not by angry villagers but by outsiders who had plotted from the moment they heard of him, and Liari. Through the bars he caught glimpses of Liari dragged down, another corridor. Her body bound, her eyes fierce even in captivity. Daniel roared her name, but a guard slammed a weapon against the bars, silencing him with a shower of sparks. His voice echoed uselessly through the cold stone, and for the first time, fear clawed its way deep into his chest. Hours passed, though they felt like days. Eventually a figure entered the chamber, one of the envoys who had mocked him in the council square, the insectoid with clicking mandibles, its voice low and full of venom. So this is the human who dares to claim a warrior of the Falari, pitiful, fragile, and yet somehow the center of this storm. You should know that the Galactic Council does not tolerate such abominations. Your so-called kittens, if they exist, will never see the light of day. Daniel clenched his fists, his chains rattling against the stone. You do not understand, he said, his voice hoarse. We are not weak. We are not what you think. The envoy leaned closer, its mandibles clicking with amusement. No, you do not understand. Your existence is already a threat. A union like yours could shatter centuries of balance between species. We cannot allow it. The envoy left him with those words, but the meaning was clear. The council was preparing not only to judge but to destroy Liari. And the unborn life she claimed to carry. Daniel sat in the darkness, his body aching, his thoughts a whirlwind of despair and fury. He had faced the trial and proven himself to the Falari. Yet here he was, chained like an animal, waiting for a council to decide if he deserved to exist. Liari's absence weighed heavier on him than the chains. He thought of her golden eyes, the way she stood fearless against warriors and envoys alike, the way she had declared to the galaxy that he was hers, and he knew he could not let this be the end. He would not allow them to break her or kill what they feared. A guard passed by, and Daniel studied the movement of the patrols, every step, every shift of armor, every moment of distraction, his human mind turning over the problem again and again. This was not the first time humanity had been caged by forces stronger than them. History was filled with such moments, but always humans found a way to endure and escape. Yet before escape could be made, the situation grew worse the next day. He was dragged before a small tribunal of alien envoys, their robes heavy with symbols of authority. Liari was brought as well, bound but unbowed, her gaze burning like fire. One of the envoys announced coldly, "The council will soon convene to decide the matter of these two. Until then, we have full authority to examine the truth of their claim." Daniel's blood ran cold. He knew what examination meant, and the thought of them experimenting on Liari or on the unborn life filled him with rage. He pulled against his chains, struggling to break free, but the guards held him down. Liari, however, did not scream. She did not beg. She looked directly at him, and with a voice steady as iron, she said, "Hold fast, Daniel. Do not let them see you break." Her strength fed his own, and though the chains cut into his wrists, he forced himself to breathe steady. His mind sharpening with a single truth: he would not let this be their end, whatever it took. He would find a way to rise again. That night, alone in his cell, he whispered to the darkness, "They think humans are weak. They think we can be caged. But they will see. They will see what it means when a human refuses to fall. The unstoppable escape." The hours in the cell turned into a blur. Daniel lost track of time. His body weary, his mind restless, yet his spirit refused to surrender. He watched the guards' every movement, memorized the sound of their boots against the floor and the rhythm of the patrols. He studied the weak spots in their armor, the way the insectoid envoy favored his right leg, the way the mechanical sentinels paused before turning their heads. These were small details, but to a human who had learned to survive through ingenuity, They were keys waiting to be used. He thought of Liari chained somewhere else within the stronghold, her golden eyes blazing even in captivity. He thought of the promise she made that their bond was not just chance, but destiny, and he let that thought fill him with strength. Humans had always been underestimated by the galaxy. They were called fragile. They were dismissed as lesser. But what other species carried such stubborn willpower? What other species had thrived on a death world like Earth? The aliens had no idea what it meant to be human, and they were about to learn. The opportunity came when one of the mechanical guards entered to deliver food. A tray of strange rations clattered against the floor, and the machine turned to leave. Daniel lunged, slamming his chains against its legs. The impact knocked the machine off balance, and it fell with a crash, sparks flying. Daniel wasted no time. He brought the heavy chains down again and again until the light in its eyes flickered and died. He pried the weapon from its grasp, a jagged baton that hummed with energy, then worked the broken metal of the guard's armor against his shackles, grinding until the lock snapped free. His wrists burned, and his arms trembled, but he was free. Daniel stood tall for the first time since his capture, gripping the baton with grim determination. He crept into the corridor, moving silently the way he had once done during scavenger runs on abandoned colonies. His heart pounded in his chest, but his steps were steady. He was not just escaping. He was hunting. Every guard that crossed his path fell quickly to his strikes, and he moved like a shadow through the stronghold. At last he found Liari, her body bound to a metal frame, wires pressed against her skin, yet her eyes still burned with defiance. Daniel rushed to her side, tearing at the restraints with the baton. Sparks flew as the wires snapped. She dropped to her knees, breathing heavily before rising. "With a snarl, I knew you would come," she whispered, and her claws extended, ready for battle. Together they moved as one, a human and a Falari, cutting through the guards that surged to stop them. Their escape did not go unnoticed. Alarms blared through. The hall's alien voices shouted orders. Mechanical drones buzzed overhead, but Daniel and Liari fought with relentless fury. Every step forward, carved in blood and fire, they pushed through corridors choked with enemies, their bodies battered but their wills unbroken. Daniel felt his muscles scream with exhaustion. Yet every time he thought he could not go further, he saw Liari at his side, slashing with claws and blade, her tail lashing like a whip, and he found strength again. Word of their breakout spread quickly across the village. Young Falari warriors who had listened to Daniel's words before now rose in defiance, inspired by the sight of him fighting side by side with their champion. They clashed with the envoys in the streets, turning the night into chaos. The once silent city became a battlefield lit by fire and crystal light. Daniel and Liari emerged into the open sky, their breaths ragged, their bodies torn, yet their eyes blazing with victory around them. The younger warriors rallied, their chants echoing through the air, no longer mocking but filled with pride. The galactic envoys tried to regain control, their voices booming through amplifiers demanding obedience, but the Falari youths ignored them. Their loyalty had shifted. Their eyes fixed on Daniel and Liari as symbols of defiance. The envoys unleashed their machines. But Daniel led the charge, wielding the stolen baton with ferocity, his human cunning finding weaknesses in the enemy's formation. Liari fought beside him, her golden eyes fierce as lightning together. They were unstoppable. By dawn, the stronghold was in ruins. The envoys forced to retreat, their ships lifting into the sky under a hail of Falari blades and arrows. Daniel stood among the wreckage, breathing hard, his body scarred but his spirit burning brighter than ever. Liari placed her hand on his shoulder, her claws gentle, her voice steady. "You see," she said, "they thought you weak. They thought us fools. But now they know the truth. The village that once mocked him now looked upon him with new eyes, some still fearful, but many with respect." The young warriors bowed their heads to him, not as a leader, but as a comrade who had proven himself in the fire. Daniel felt no pride, only a grim awareness that this was not the end. The Galactic Council would not forgive what had happened here. They would come in greater force and soon. But for now, he had shown the galaxy a glimpse of what it meant to be human. Liari turned to him, her voice low, so only he could hear. "Our kittens will not be born in chains. They will be born free under the stars, and nothing will stop us from protecting them." Daniel met her gaze, and for the first time since the shocking words in the marketplace, he believed her fully, not with doubt or fear but with certainty. Whatever storm awaited them, he was ready. The birth of a legend. The fires of the battle still smoldered as dawn broke across the Falari city. Smoke drifted into the skies while rubble lay scattered where once stood the proud halls of the envoys. Daniel stood in the ruins, his body aching, his wounds still raw but his spirit alive. He had escaped chains and fought alongside Liari against impossible odds, and though the victory was theirs, he knew the war was far from over. The Galactic Council would never ignore such defiance. Their eyes were already turned upon this world, and upon him. Liari stood beside him, her golden eyes watching the horizon. Her expression fierce yet soft when she turned. To him she touched her hand to his chest where his heart pounded. "You see, Daniel," she said, "our fight is not over, but we have proven something to them. They cannot unsee it. You were caged, and yet you rose. You were mocked, and yet you endured. You were doubted, and yet you stand here now as one who has changed the course of fate." Daniel felt the weight of her words heavy, yet he did not shrink from them. For the first time he saw himself not as a stranded wanderer, not as a fragile outsider, but as a man who had endured trials that would have broken many. The Council's vengeance came swifter than expected. Within days, ships appeared in orbit, vast vessels gleaming with power, their presence casting a shadow over Falara. A demand was sent. To the surface, Daniel and Liari were to surrender themselves for judgment, or the planet would suffer the wrath of the Council. Fear rippled through the villagers once more. The same voices who had cheered their victory now trembled at the sight of overwhelming power. Some argued they should give the human up to save themselves. Others whispered that perhaps Liari should go alone. But the younger warriors who had fought beside them rose in defiance, their voices sharp and proud. "No," they shouted. "No more chains, no more submission." Daniel heard their cries, and though he knew the odds were impossible, he also knew there was no turning back. Humanity had always faced impossible odds and found a way forward. He gathered the warriors in the central square, speaking with a voice stronger than he thought he possessed. "You call my people weak, you call us fragile, yet you see me standing before you scarred but unbroken. You see what we have done together. If they come for us, let them come, but let them find not fear but fire." Liari's tail lashed with pride as she took her place beside him, her hand resting lightly on her blade. The warriors raised their weapons. The crowd roared, and for a moment, Daniel felt as though Earth itself was standing, with him unseen but present in every heartbeat. The ships above prepared for war. But the Council had underestimated what one spark could ignite for across the stars. News of the battle had already spread, whispers carried to other worlds of a human who had stood against chains, who had fought with nothing but will and cunning, whispers of kittens that might one day walk the line between species. When the first Council soldiers descended, armored and armed, the Falari were ready. The battle that followed was fierce, brutal, and desperate. Yet something had changed. This time the villagers fought not in fear, but with conviction. Inspired by Daniel and Liari, they saw in them proof that weakness was not what defined humanity, but endurance. The soldiers were stronger, their weapons more advanced, but every time Daniel fell, he rose again, bloodied but not broken. Every time Liari struck, her claws carved a path through the enemy. Together they were a storm that the Council had not foreseen. Nightfall. The invaders retreated, their pride wounded, their ship scorched. Daniel collapsed to his knees, exhausted, his body trembling. Liari knelt beside him, pressing her forehead against his, their breaths mingling, her voice a whisper. Fierce and gentle. "It is done for now. We have shown them, and they will remember." Daniel closed his eyes, holding on to her words, knowing the storm was not gone but only delayed. Yet he also knew they had created something that could not be undone. Weeks passed, and the fires of war gave way to rebuilding. The Council did not return immediately, though their shadow still loomed. Daniel found moments of peace in the village where once he was mocked. Now he was greeted with respect. The children who had once laughed at him now stared with wide eyes as though looking at a hero. The warriors who had doubted him now nodded in recognition. Liari never left his side, her strength never wavering, her presence a constant reminder of what they had endured together. And then the moment came under the twin moons of Falara. Liari's voice broke through the night. Daniel. It is time, she whispered. He rushed to her side, and there, under the soft glow of starlight, their kittens were, born small, fragile, yet fierce, their eyes gleaming with a strange light. Not fully human, not fully Falari, but something new. Something that carried the resilience of Earth and the strength of Falara. The villagers gathered in silence, awe-filling. Their faces, the elders bowed their heads for the first time, acknowledging that what they had feared was not a curse, but a gift. Daniel held one of the kittens in his arms, its tiny claws curling around his finger, its heartbeat steady against his skin. He looked at Liari and felt tears burn in his eyes. He had come here broken and lost, mocked as weak and fragile. Yet here he was, holding life that could change the galaxy. Liari's eyes softened, her voice quiet and full of pride. They will write songs about this day. They will remember not the chains, not the mockery, but the truth that we created together. The Galactic Council would return one day of that. Daniel had no doubt, but when they did, they would not face a single man in chains. They would face a family, a people, and a legend already spreading across the stars. Humanity had been underestimated for the last time. Under the moons, with Liari at his side and the newborn kittens nestled in their arms, Daniel felt something he had not felt since leaving Earth, hope not just for himself, not just for Liari, but for a future where humanity would no longer be dismissed as fragile, where their strength would be known across the galaxy, and where their children would carry that strength even further. And so a human stranded among aliens had become something more, not a prisoner, not an outsider, but a father, a warrior, and the beginning of a legend that would one day shape the stars, a new dawn. The warships of the Galactic Council never truly vanished from the skies of Falara. They lingered like silent predators waiting for a moment of weakness. Yet the people of the village no longer cowered in fear. They had seen with their own eyes what a human could endure and what a human and a Falari together could create. Daniel walked through the rebuilt streets carrying the weight of scars upon his body. Yet for the first time he carried himself with pride beside him. Liari strode with her head high, her golden eyes fierce and tender at once, and behind them padded the small forms of their kittens. The children were strange to behold, their ears sharp like their mother, their skin softer like their father, their eyes glowing with a fire that seemed older than their days. The villagers whispered when they saw them, some still with uncertainty, others with reverence. Yet none could deny that these young lives existed, and none could deny that their existence had already changed everything. Daniel often thought back to the day Liari had spoken those shocking words in the marketplace. You should prepare human. We are having kittens at the time. He had felt nothing but confusion and fear, but now he understood it had not been a jest or an omen. It had been the start of a story that neither he nor the galaxy could have imagined. He held his children in his arms, felt the tiny claws grip his finger, and knew with absolute certainty that the Council could no longer erase what had been born. The Galactic Council sent envoys again, but this time they did not come with chains. They came with questions and with silence heavy upon their faces, for they too had heard the spreading whispers across the stars. Stories told in hushed voices of a human who endured what no one thought he could. A Falari warrior who defied her people to stand at his side, and the children who carried both bloodlines together. The envoys watched the kittens closely, but even they could not deny the vitality, the resilience, the unmistakable spark of something powerful. Liari stood before them, unflinching, her voice steady as stone. We will not hide. We will not bow. Our children will walk under the stars, free and proud. And if the Council fears them, then let the Council learn, fear anew. Daniel felt the fire of her words blaze within him, and when he added his voice it carried like thunder across the hall. Humanity has always been underestimated, but we endure. We rise, and we fight. We will not be erased. The envoys left with no answer, their silence louder than any threat. Daniel and Liari knew the Council would return one day, perhaps with greater force. But for now the galaxy watched with wary eyes, some in fear, some in awe, some in quiet hope. And that was enough. Years later, when the kittens grew strong, their laughter echoing through the streets and their steps carrying both the grace of the Falari and the determination of humanity. The stories had already spread to distant stars. Bards sang of the human who was mocked yet stood unbroken, and the warrior who defied tradition to claim him as her own. They sang of the children who would one day stride into the galaxy, not as mistakes, but as the proof that strength is born. Where love and defiance meet, Daniel stood beneath the twin moons with Layari at his side. His arm wrapped around her as their children played nearby. He looked to the stars and felt no fear, only certainty that humanity was no longer a forgotten species, and that the legend they had created together would never fade the end.